there are 3 more items I would like to discuss about the counter app before we draw a conclusion for this week. So number 1, I would like to trace the code, the model, view, and controller all together, and visualize the object creation for the counter, and also how we manipulate it. Number 2, I would like to summarize about the model, view, controller separation of concern paradigm that we have been discussing. And also number 3, I would like to show you how you can run and define JUnit test cases in the Android Studio IDE. So these are the 3 items I would like to discuss properly before we conclude the week. Okay, let's start with the tracing. I try to put the GUI view over here. You can think about this view is really the view when we first launch the app using the emulator. You have seen that already, so that's the view. For the controller, I simply got the attributes for the, you can think about, I just selectively choose some parts from the main activity.java, right? Just very quickly. I got this attribute declaration. I got this constructor for the app. And also, I exclude the 3 helper methods, and then I got the control method over here, control method over here. I got a control method over here. That's what I included, right? So the only thing I excluded was word, the 3 helper methods. That's those are the only 3 methods I excluded. Okay. Okay. Very quickly, you got counter C declaration. You got the constructor for the app. And also you got this button click control method. You got this button click control method. You also got this one control method as well. All right. Let's now think about how things are going to be should be visualized. And later on, you should really use this apply this principle for your own app developments in the labs. Let's say this. Initially, when the app is first launched, we're going to call this particular onCreate. Let me just highlight the method here. onCreate, right? So it's going to do basically whatever is necessary over here. For the first 2 lines, you don't have to worry. Okay, so it is this particular line you have to worry. So we simply try to say we want to create. You can think about the attribute over here is C, right? You can think about C is supposed to store the address of some counter objects. So as soon as we execute this line over here, it's now going to point to this particular object, and the value is going to be 0. Agree? Okay, so it's going to be 0. So C is now as soon as we launch the app, so we're going to point to this particular point counter objects. And I'm not including the model class over here, but it's the definition. You can simply look it up in your project in Android Studio. Right? So it's going to be value over here, and then it's going to be 0 to begin with. And notice that nothing will be displayed over here because it will only be displayed in one of these 3 methods, but nothing has been clicked just yet. Right? So that's the initial setup, right? Just by executing this, right? That's the green one. Let's simulate some scenario over here. For example, I might say here I want to do increments right away, right? As soon as I click on increments, I know that I'm actually going to trigger. I'm going to create some events, right? Event driven. As soon as I got some interaction with the GUI, as soon as I do increments over here, let me just say this. As soon as I click on increments the first time, I'm actually going to trigger whatever method that's attached to it, which is this particular method, right? So that's the increment clicked method. So when I execute this, let's see, we're gonna say C.increments, right? So C is the context objects. So C.increments. So I'm gonna increment it from 0 to 1 over here. And then when I do the second line over here, that one is going to call the helper method. And then it's going to find the GUI component with this particular ID, which is exactly the invisible one over here, right? And we're going to set the value to be, set the value of that particular text view to be counter value C.getValue, right? Which will be 1. Okay, so that's why we'll see counter value over here, and then it should be 1 over here. Because when you actually say C.getValue over here, context object is still C. So C.value still going to give you 1 over here. So that's why you got this particular output displayed in the mobile device screen. Okay, hopefully so far you're fine. What if we try to, let's say, do let's say decrements over here. If we try to click on decrements, so that means we're going to invoke this method over here, the decrement click, right? That's a separate method that's added or registered to this particular GUI components. Let's see what's going to happen. So let's use orange over here. So we're going to execute this line over here, and C is the context object, right? Still the C dot decrements. So we're going to decrement from 1 to back to 0 over here. And then we're going to set the GUI components with this particular ID. So it's really the same GUI component that we're talking about, right? So we're going to set counter value to be this particular value. So C is still the context object. So the value now will be 0. So what's going to happen is it's going to basically wipe out. I'm just going to cross it out, okay? It's going to wipe out this value over here, and then it's going to say counter value, and then 0. But from our human eyes, we only see the change from 1 to 0. But it's actually going to be display a fresh string. But just this part here is just the same as this part, so you wouldn't tell the difference. All right. So that's about it. Let's do one more. What if I try to do, for example, let's say I try to click on this particular button here. Let's say I want to initialize a new counter. Before that, I'm going to say 23. Over here, which is the value I try, and also I will click on this button here. All right, what's going to happen? As soon as I click on this button here, the corresponding method registered to it will be this particular method over here, right? And then we're going to execute one by one. So this part over here is going to retrieve the text init value from the GUI components of this particular ID, which is indeed this particular text field, right? So what that will do is it's going to retrieve 23 as a string. So text init value will be 23 in the quotes. It's a string. And then we're going to call this Java method integer the parse int because we assume the user is going to be well behaved. They will always give you the string value that can be converted into an integer. So init value will be 23. Okay. And then we're going to execute this particular model method over here. So now C is going to be reassigned to just another object creation, and the init value over here will be 3. So that means C, rather than storing the address of this object over here, is going to store the address of a brand new object over here every time you actually click on this particular button, right? So it's now going to point to just another object over here of the same type, which is counter. And then which got only one attribute's value. And what should be the value? Should be 23, right? 23. Sorry, should be 23 rather than 3. So it should be 23 over here. Okay, let's just do a final one. What if I try to actually execute? Let me use a different color. How about this one here? What if I try to click on this button one more time over here, right? What's going to happen is I'm going to actually, let me use purple. I'm going to execute the corresponding method one more time, right? So I'm going to execute this method again. So now when I execute this line here, over here, C will be the context object. So C dot, beg your pardon, it should be increment, right? Sorry. So this should be increment method that's registered to it. So that should be increments. And then when I execute this line here, C is the context object. So C dot over here, right? So dot will simply just follow the address, and then dot increments. So now that's gonna delete increment from 23 to 24, and then we're going to execute this line over here. It's gonna set the view for this particular GUI components of this ID, right? That's referring to this particular text view over here. So we and then C dot get value over here. C dot get value is going to be 24. So this one is going to be crossed out, and then it's going to be just running out of space. I'll just say counter value. The first part is the same, but it's now going to be 24, right? That's exactly what I illustrated in the previous video. All right, guys, it's a very quick visualization about and also tracing about how things go. So it's really important. Let me recap the programming pattern here. You gotta declare the attributes at the level of at the class level of the controller, the main activity class, and then you have to make sure in the constructor of your app, you actually initialize the object to some default value, maybe. And then for every button click, you have to define the corresponding control method and make sure they are added to the corresponding button. For example, this method here should be added to this particular button. And this method here should be added to this particular button. And this method here should be added to this particular button, right? Why don't I actually make it explicit for you? Here. You can think about, let me use this. Do I have it? Let's use a red. You can think about this method over here is actually added to this particular button over here. And this method here has been added to this particular increments method over here. And this method here has been added to this particular decrement method here, right? It's really important for you to know, right? So that's why whenever you click on that, a method is going to make sure it's going to execute the corresponding fragment of code. And the way we trace it is pretty much similar to how we trace it before when we talk about OOP on the Eclipse context. All right, that's about the tracing. Let's now move on to summarize about the pattern we are talking about, the paradigm. Model view controller over here. It's kind of similar to the very beginning of the semester when we spoke about. Let me show you the diagram very quickly. Okay, remember this diagram over here, right? When we talk about model, JUnit tests, and also console apps, you can think about we still got model, still serve the same purpose, right? But now the console apps over here is now split into two separate concepts. One is about the view, the other one is about the controller. Think about this part here, and the view is actually going to be collecting input from the user and also displaying some output to the screen as well. And the controller is similar to the console apps, but you can think about console app over here is now divided into two parts, the view and the controller. But just think about the pattern over here. Let me go back to the diagram over here. Okay, we spoke about view and controller already, right? Let me just summarize, recap very quickly. When we got a user over here, the user is going to interact with the GUI over here. And the GUI is actually going to over here, remember what we said before? Let me just remind you very quickly. So it's going to be some button click, right? So whenever the user click on some button, it's going to generate some events, right? And try to invoke the corresponding method from the controller. And controller is going to do some computation and then go back to the once the computation is done, it's going to display the result back to the view, the GUI. But now, when we talk about compute over here, we actually talk about you may actually have the computation by calling methods on the model objects, right? So that's the new part. Let's take a look. So here you can think about this one is going to call trigger control methods. Trigger the control methods, right? Depending on which button you clicked. And then the controller is actually going to invoke. It's actually going to do several things. It's going to, first of all, let me just say this. Let me just do in sequence. First of all, itself is actually going to, actually I'll just put something over here. It's going to retrieve inputs from GUI, right? Maybe from the text field. For example, in this particular case, we're gonna retrieve the input from over here, right? Retrieve the inputs, and also after you got the input, it's going to invoke methods on the model objects, right? It's going to, I would say, either creates, or you can manipulate model objects by calling methods, right? You can see, just for example, you can see here, this is about how you manipulate the model objects, and this is how you manipulate the model object by incrementing it and also decrementing it, right? So these are, and also this is about initializing it. So 1, 2, 3, 4. These are the 4 operations on the model objects. Okay, And then the model object is definitely going to return maybe some value. You can also get a return value, right? So you can think about manipulation itself over here include about getting the return value. Okay, let me just say that over here. So this includes about getting the return value. And then once you get the return values back, you're actually going to the controller is actually going to display some value back over here, right? So this is going to display some outputs. Okay, you can see here, you can see this part here, set contents of text view, set contents of text view, and set contents of text view over here. So these are the three that you display back, right, for the controller, right? Conceptually, you should not think about the model is actually going to do anything with the controller. If you look at the definition for our counter, we did not mention anything about the main activity. So you should really be clear about the following point. When you go to the model package, all the classes over there, they are simply just like what you did for your Eclipse project in the previous week. So here we should see no trace and no connection to the controller itself, right? Only the controller may do something to the model, but the model never do anything back to the controller. It's really important to realize. Okay. And now that's about the model view controller. Okay. And then the summarizing point. So this part the same as before. And this part similar before, except that, so now we say you may call the methods for on the model objects. And then for the model package over here, you can see it's really important to see what we should define. For the model package, right, it should be should be multiple classes. It can be more than one. It can be one class. It can be more than one. And also you got your attributes and also your public methods for the controller to call. All right. Finally. So far we talk about tracing and we talk about the summary of the model view and also controller. All right, and then finally I'd like to speak about JUnit testing very quickly, and then we are done for the week. Okay, so now for this JUnit testing over here, so you can think about in some way testing is just another package or another module in your system that will actually try to make use of the model. Okay, so this one here is basically going to write assertions. You can see it's going to write assertions on the model object. So what it's going to do is it's going to use for testing purpose. And let me just bring you back to the original diagram here. You should think about this particular arrow over here is identical to what we said in the beginning of the semester when we say the JUnit test actually uses the model. So these two arrows are identical. All right. Okay, let me go back. All right, so guys, I think this week we actually spoke about the model view controller testing relationship, and also we spoke about specifically about the view and controller. You should really review that and make sure you understand. It's a very important conceptual model for event-driven programming, which is one of the learning outcomes for this course.